Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Is that microphone on? Yes, it is. We can hear. Hello, everyone. We're going to get started now. If everyone would like to take their seats for this in conversation with the Foreign Secretary, the Right Honourable James Cleverly. Now, if you were in the last session, I'm Sebastian Payne. I'm Director of Onward, and I was trying to think how long I've known you, James, but it's probably longer than either of us care to remember. It was probably 2015, I would say, when you first became the Conservative MP for Braintree.
Yeah. I'm now getting to the stage where I don't lie about my age. I now get to the stage where I lie about how long I've known people, because that's the giveaway of my ever progressing years. So yeah.
Well, we're here to talk about your current role as Foreign Secretary, which you have been in for just about a year now, and we've been quite a few occupants of the Foreign Office over the past couple of years, as with some other government departments as well. You were briefly Education Secretary last summer.
I was glorious. That was my, I think, short but glorious time. 9 weeks. 9 weeks of education.
What was the highlight of that 9 weeks?
Genuinely getting through the A-level exam results day pretty much unscathed.
With no rogue algorithms.
With no rogue algorithms, and it was, it was, you imagine the whole year building up to this. I turn up and they say, oh, in a couple of weeks' time, Secretary of State, you'll be personally held responsible for the education results of tens of thousands of young people. And I went, but I've only just arrived. It's like, well, you know, comes with the job, but we did it. But thanks to my predecessors. I'd like to claim credit, but my predecessors deserve credit.
But you moved on swiftly from there to become Foreign Secretary. Now, you've been there, said, about a year now. What's been your biggest surprise and your biggest lesson from the Foreign Office? I suppose one of the advantages that I had, having been a minister in the department before becoming Secretary of State in the department, there were fewer things that were complete surprises. There are a couple of things that I can't talk about in detail. There's some nasty surprises when you get taken up to the room where you have the very, very secure briefings, and you know, the big ring binder of scary truths gets unveiled to you, the kind of things that only the Foreign Secretary is allowed to know. That can be quite... Were you prepared for that? Because you must have known in your head the ring binder of doom existed.
Yeah, and look, I'd previously been the Minister for Middle East, North Africa, so a lot of the things about the threats, about the work that we have to do to keep British people safe both at home and abroad, I was aware of a lot of those things. When you actually see how much time, and I'm unapologetically proud of our intelligence and security services, because when you see how much work they do keeping us safe, that most people will never know about and they'll never get the credit for, and they do it certainly not for the money. They do it for the love of their country and, you know, the importance of the job. When you see just how much they do on our behalf, it really is quite humbling.
So I thought we'd do a quick tour of the world, much like your travel schedule, of some of the countries and issues you've dealt with since you became Foreign Secretary. Of course, top of that list has to be the war in Ukraine, and obviously some of that falls under the purview of the Defence Secretary. But in a diplomatic sense, what have you learned in your year as Foreign Secretary with regards to Ukraine, and where things will develop in the coming months ahead?
Well, one of the things that really struck me when I visited Ukraine, and I spoke to the Ukrainians, and not just the political leadership, but when I spoke to ordinary Ukrainians, people that ran restaurants, people that had just very ordinary businesses, the thing that I am now more certain of than ever before is they are not going to stop fighting until they have got their country back. And all these lazy voices that say, oh, if the UK or if the West stopped arming Ukraine, the war would be over. That is nonsense. This war finishes when the Russians leave, and not until. The Ukrainians will stick with it. And we promised them that we would stick with them until they got their country back, which is why and I know the PM is on the same page as this, and the Defence Secretary and the Cabinet, we are absolutely determined to keep supporting them until they regain their country, because they are not going to stop. And you know, I met a bar owner, a boyfriend, girlfriend, and they ran a bar in Kyiv, and they run the bar at weekends, and during the week they shut up the bar, and then they go down to the line of contact and they volunteer as battlefield medics during the week, and then they go back to Kyiv to run their business 3 nights a week to fund their volunteering as battlefield medics. They've been doing this now for months and months and months, and they are determined. And when you see that level of determination, it's inspiring, but it also, as I say, reinforces my belief that they are going to stick with it until the job is done, and therefore we have to stick with them.
And just on the slightly thorny issue, though, when you say want their country back, of course, there is the question of, is it pre-2014 borders when we think about Crimea? Because President Zelensky has been pretty clear in all of his public statements that that does include Crimea. But in terms of the UK's position and how you see it, what's your feel on that? Because they're two quite separate things.
So I feel that our position has really got to be defined by Ukraine's position. I don't think we have the right, I don't think any of us have the right to start dictating to other countries how much of their country they should give away in order that we can, move on to other important issues. I don't think we would take kindly if someone were to do that to us, and so I'm not going to start doing that to the Ukrainian leadership. The bottom line is that the nature of any peace settlement has got to rightly be a decision for the Ukrainian political leadership, because they're the ones that are going to have to justify any decisions to the Ukrainian people. And I'm not going to start turning around to the Ukrainians and saying, you should do this, you should do that, you shouldn't do the other. That really is for them.
Now, from Ukraine, hopping to the other side of the Atlantic and America, because that is going to play quite a big role next year, because we've got, I think, the first year since 1964 where we're likely to have a UK election and American election in the same year. And it was, of course, LBJ in America, and Howard Wilson won that election here. There is, if the polls are correct, a very good chance President Trump will win that election if it was held tomorrow. We'll see what happens in the campaign. But he is taking a very different view on Ukraine. And there is a challenge for the UK there, because if he was to win and return to the White House again and either try to cut some kind of deal with Vladimir Putin, which he's talked about in several interviews, or was to significantly withdraw spend or effort, that would leave the UK in a bit of a pickle, because a lot of our military aid is piggybacked off America.
Look, we've been ahead of the curve throughout on this, and we have defined our position because of our values. So when my predecessors, when the Prime Minister's predecessors decided to train the Ukrainian armed forces after the invasion of Crimea, we were ahead of the pack internationally. When we decided to donate anti-tank missiles, we were ahead of the pack internationally. When Ben Wallace, the Prime Minister, and I met over Christmas to decide what our posture was going to be towards Ukraine in 2023, we decided that we would donate main battle tanks prior to any other country in the world. We decided that we would commit to training fast jet pilots before anyone else in the world. We committed to donate those long-range missiles, Storm Shadow missiles, before anyone else in the world. And we did that because we believed it to be the right thing to do. And on each of those files, we have led the world. And the point, and I've said this to the Americans, that we will do what we believe to be right. And we have made a commitment to continue to support the Ukrainians. Now, they can join in or they can watch us do it, but it is going to happen. And the point that I've also made is that we should be very, very thoughtful about the message that we send to the world, because every potential aggressor, despot, and dictator is watching how we respond to this situation in Ukraine. And we've got a choice in terms of the message that we send. We can either send the message that when we commit to something, we mean it and we stick with it until the job is done, or we can send the message that we've got about 18 months, 24 months worth of patience, and if you're willing to be aggressive for long enough, you get to win. And that second message is not one that we should be pumping out into the world. The world will become an infinitely more dangerous place if we buckle at this point. So it is in
our interest, not just the Ukrainians, in our national interest and in the US national interest to stick with it. Because if we don't, we're just going to have to revisit this anyway, and it'll be more expensive, more painful, and more bloody if we don't resolve it now.
And with regards to that American election, obviously I'm not expecting to say who you would like to win, but how does the prospect of Donald Trump returning to the White House make you feel?
Well, look, we've worked bilaterally with a Trump-led White House, and we make it work. I mean, the bottom line is we always make it work. The United States of America is one of our closest and most important allies in the world. We respect the decision in a mature, high-functioning democracy. We respect the decision made by the voters of that country, and whoever they choose to be their next president, we will make sure that relationship works. Because when the UK and the US are working together, the world is a healthier, wealthier, safer place. If wedges can be driven between our two countries, that will not be to the best interest of the UK, will not be to the best interests of the United States of America. And the kind of countries, the kind of leadership that would advocate a US-America split do not have our best interests at heart. So we will work with whoever the American people choose.
Now, to hop back on your proverbial plane and go all the way over now to China, as you actually did as Foreign Secretary, which was quite a moment, because there's obviously relations between the West and China, but the UK in particular have been pretty icy for some time now. Was it your decision to make that trip, and do you think it was a success?
Yes and yes. Now, I would caveat that second yes by saying we've got to be realistic about what you can achieve on any one bilateral meeting like that. We haven't had a foreign secretary go to China, I think if I'm right, for about 5 years. I think if my maths is correct. But the bottom line is China is large, it is wealthy, it is influential, it behaves on the international stage in ways that we feel need to change, which means that we have to engage with China. And sometimes the language that we use around foreign relations, I think is awkward. So we talk about engagement, we talk about having a diplomatic relationship with another country, and sometimes that makes it sound as if this was a kind of, a cozy cup of tea and a nice chit chat over dim sum or a slice of cake. That's not what international relations is about. International relations is about getting stuff done. Not necessarily instantly, but it's about getting stuff done.
Would you say that's your defining characteristic about a foreign secretary, of getting stuff done?
Look, that's what I try to focus on. I've always said we should be a results-orientated department. One of the things that I have a real bee in my bonnet about, and when I started saying this, I think the department chuckled, thinking it was a bit of an affectation. I hate the phrase "deeply concerned," and and I tell
of
you
course,
something.
you never hear that in the Foreign Office
Well,
at all.
Not anymore. You don't. No, seriously, there was someone highlighted to me actually just a couple of days ago. There's a Twitter feed. Don't do it now. I don't want you distracted. There's a Twitter feed called "Is the EU Concerned?" And basically, it is a repository of all the statements that gets made that says the EU is concerned. The EU is very concerned by. The EU is deeply concerned by. The EU is extremely concerned by. It's this big stream of statements about how concerned we are about things. And we used to do that a lot in the UK. And I made the point, I don't want people to know how I feel. I want people to know what we do. So we're either deeply concerned enough to do something, in which case let's tell people what we're doing. And if we choose not to do something, maybe it's because we weren't really deeply concerned, and therefore we should probably not claim that we were. So it's about getting stuff done. That trip to China was not because I was deeply concerned about Chinese behavior. It was because I was trying to change Chinese behavior, both bilaterally, regionally, and within China's borders itself. Now, as I say, I'm not naive. You don't just have one robust conversation and expect a country like China to suddenly change its behaviors. But if you don't engage, if you don't eyeball people, if you don't sit across the table and make it clear what we regard as acceptable and unacceptable behaviours, both bilaterally and more generally, then you are not going to be able to make change. And just saying nasty things about a country on Twitter, that's not how foreign affairs actually makes a difference. And I'm here to make a difference.
And are you at all concerned? 'Cause obviously, some of your
I'm not deeply concerned.
some of your colleagues back at home, Conservative MPs, take a very different view of that. They are very happy to take hardline positions, in newspapers and on media, on Twitter about China. And some of them were quite critical of your trip there, saying that actually this is showing that we're kowtowing and that we've gone back to the golden era that we saw in a previous government, even though the geopolitical context has changed. What would you say to those people?
Look, some of the people that have been saying that are people who are being sanctioned by the Chinese state. So I get why they're so angry about this.
Are you sanctioned by the Chinese state?
I don't think so. I'm not sure. I don't think so. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to go
Your spin doctor is shaking his head, so we'll take that as a no then.
Not yet.
After this, he will
But
be.
I'm not going to take it too personally if people who are currently being sanctioned by the Chinese state have a very firm position on this. I get it. I don't agree with their position, but I get it. But the point I've made is that we have influence in the UK. We have leverage, even with a country as big and as wealthy and as powerful as China, and I intend to use it. And if I don't engage with that country, then I'm not utilising all the tools at my disposal. And as I say, it's about getting stuff done. And look, there's often contradictions in their position. So I've had people say, don't talk to the Chinese government, don't engage with Chinese ministers. And then in the next breath saying, you must raise the case of Jimmy Lai. And I'm like, well, hang on, I have to talk to them to raise the case of this individual, so I'm going to talk to them. Again, situations where people say, a UK minister visiting China is kowtowing and a demonstration of weakness, but also if a Chinese minister visits the UK, what's that? Is that them kowtowing and showing weakness to us? I mean, your argument either works in both directions or it doesn't work at all. The bottom line is visiting each other's countries, having meetings, having those discussions, that is my job and I intend to do it.
And this is the last question on China. Of course, during this period, we have seen the alleged Chinese spy working in the House of Parliament. And, I don't want to expect you to comment on that particular case because there's obviously ongoing proceedings there. But in terms of the general penetration of our democracy by China, that we know that Russia has sought to try and hack and bias and change things, do you think China should be regarded in the same way as Russia in terms of of our political system?
Well, look, I'm not going to talk about any individual country, but we have security services for a reason. Those fantastic people that work for MI5 exist for a reason. If foreign governments weren't trying to penetrate our democracy, penetrate our society, if they weren't trying to infiltrate, and if they weren't trying to spy on us, we wouldn't need MI5. It exists for a reason. We have incredibly professional people within that organisation for a reason. So it shouldn't be a surprise that the UK, because we are influential on the world stage, because we are a major democracy, because we have voice, because we have leverage, we of course will be the target of overseas espionage and attempted penetration. We shouldn't be surprised by that. I'm not going to go as far as say we should wear it as a badge of honour, but it is a reflection of the fact that we matter on the world stage, and countries try to influence us. There's a good way and there's a bad way. Diplomacy, the kind of international lobbying that we all do, that's the appropriate way. And we defend ourselves against inappropriate attempts to influence.
Right, we're getting back on your plane now and going to Brussels at this point, because during your period as Foreign Secretary, we've had two notable agreements struck with the EU. One was the Windsor Framework with regards to the Northern Ireland Protocol, and then the second, of course, was the associate membership of Horizon that was negotiated a couple of weeks ago there. It's very interesting that obviously we are outside the bloc now. We've done these bespoke deals at this point, and it's an approach that this government is doing, but also the Labour Party are also talking about as well. And we saw Sir Keir Starmer talking about some kind of returns deal. Do you think essentially you could say we were in the EU but a bit out? Whatever happens, are we going to end up out but a bit in?
Under a Conservative government, we are remaining outside the European Union.
Out.
Fact, out. Like Mickey Flanagan, out. I see a lot of you don't watch stand-up comedy. Okay. So there's a big difference between negotiating with a near neighbour and an important set of relationships, both the EU institutions and the nation states with the EU, in the best interests of the UK, and basically the capitulation that we would inevitably see with the Labour Party. So, like everyone will have had their own motivations for voting for Brexit. So I wrote an open letter with a number of colleagues, 2015 intake, in January of 2016, basically saying that we've looked at what Prime Minister Cameron was asking for in terms of renegotiation with the EU, and even if he got everything he asked for, we didn't think it was going to be enough, and therefore, with a heavy heart, we would be voting to leave the European Union. And I was told by someone who I respect enormously that my political career was over. And for those people who had been campaigning to leave the European Union for decades, of course their position was priced in. I'd only just got elected.
It's quite like Rishi Sunak, who was
funnily enough,
the same thing.
Funnily enough, another person whose career was going to be destroyed by the fact he came out publicly for Brexit as a 2015 intaker was Rishi Sunak. I can't remember what happened to him, but I did all right. But the point is, for those people who'd been campaigning on this for years publicly, their Brexit vote was priced in. But there are a number of us, including the Prime Minister, including myself, who basically did what we believed to be right, even though we were told it would destroy our political careers. And so when I say that in this job now, when I make sure that we have a pragmatic working relationship with the EU that allows our businesses to trade with the EU as easily as possible, but without getting sucked into the single market, without getting sucked into the customs union, I believe my credentials are copper bottomed.
Have you ever, even in your darkest moments, ever regretted your Brexit vote?
No, not even slightly. Not once. Look, when I first became minister in the department, I flew out to the Middle East. No, in fact, funnily enough, my first trip as a minister in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, as it were, before the merger, was to the Munich Security Conference. So the first trip I made on the day after I was appointed was to Munich. And I had a series of meetings with representatives of governments in the Middle East, which was my new patch. And over and over again, they were saying, brilliant, the Brits are back. You're engaging with us again. I watched a documentary that was shot I think it was in '98, and it was called How to Be the Foreign Secretary.
Michael Cockerell.
It was, exactly. And it had Robin Cook being the new shiny Labour Foreign Secretary. And one of the things that really struck me is he was talking about his monthly 2-day trip to Brussels for EU foreign ministers meetings. 2 days trip, 2 days every month. Now you said that I've done, in my first year in the job, I did 58 international visits. That would have been impossible if I had to weave in a monthly pilgrimage to Brussels. I just would not have been able to have that amount of contact with interlocutors around the world. I would not have gone to Latin America. I would not have been the first foreign secretary since they became independent to visit the Solomon Islands. And you might think, well, does it really matter if no one's been to the Solomon Islands since they become independent? Well, the fact they're in the process of building a Chinese harbour that will accept Chinese military ships
Yes, I think it's really important that we hadn't visited that country for decades. And the sad truth is there are lots of places I go to where people said, oh, you're the first foreign secretary since, this person back in Margaret Thatcher's time. That's just unacceptable. We have to have a global presence, and you can't have a global presence if you spend half your working life pinging backwards and forwards to Brussels, as lovely, although rainy, as Brussels is.
Now, finally, I'm going to bring your plane back to Westminster and ask you about a couple of domestic things here. So, first of all, I want to ask you about something I don't think you've talked that much about, which is Scotland. Because at the moment, obviously, Scotland has gone through something of a change of leadership, shall we say, over the past year while you've been in this job as well. And the prospects for that are important because the fact is the United Kingdom on the world stage is about a united kingdom. Yes. It's about the nations bound together, working together, and for a long period you've had in Scotland a country that has not been as tightly working together as it could have been. How do you see that developing, particularly with regards to the election next year, when a lot of people are expecting a potential a collapse in the SNP, like when I make a cheese souffle and it comes out the oven, which might benefit some parties but not necessarily the Conservatives? So
I have a huge amount of admiration. I'm a bit of a man crush, I have to say, on Scotland's Foreign Secretary. He's a tall, charming, good-looking guy. It's me. It's me. So I am Scotland's Foreign Secretary. I am as passionate about promoting Scotland on the world stage as I am about promoting any other part of the United Kingdom, and I do so regularly. Whether it's investment opportunities in Scotland, whether it's renewable energy opportunities in Scotland, whether it's Scotch whisky, and I don't want to reinforce stereotypes, but incredibly popular on the world stage. So I am Scotland's Foreign Secretary. International relations is a devolved matter, and I do know that Angus Robertson, who I like personally, is trying very, very hard to pretend to be Scotland's Foreign Secretary. He's not. I've told him that, and because clearly I was unambiguous when I said, you will not pretend to be an independent nation on the world stage if you're going to rely on my civil servants to facilitate meetings for you. Clearly that was not clear enough. I find myself now in a position where once again I'm going to have to write to the Scottish Government to say, it's really very simple. Foreign affairs is a reserved matter. I am Scotland's Foreign Secretary. You will not abuse the professionalism of my civil servants, and until you get your head around that, we are not going to be able to facilitate foreign meetings where you're promoting separatism. The UK is one whole. It is an amazing country and every bit of it is amazing. I promote every bit of the UK all the time, and I'm proud and passionate about doing so. And the point I would say about Scotland, particularly as they head towards a general election where their record in government will be put under the microscope, rather than pretending to have a separate foreign policy, I would suggest the SNP were better served at dealing with the public services on which Scottish people rely. So I feel very, very strongly about this. I live in Scotland. I love Scotland. It has so much to offer on the world stage as part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Now, one big topic that's dominating a Westminster debate is the ECHR, and we've heard several of your colleagues, including Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch, saying departure should be an option on the table. Do you agree with her?
Well, I get the frustration with sometimes activist judges. I would purely make the observation that just as France makes fantastic wine, but increasingly now we make some brilliant wine. Make some brilliant wine in Essex. So a lot of things that are wonderful overseas, we are able to produce here in the UK. And left-wing activist judges, we've got quite a few of those in the UK. And so one of the points I make is that as a government, you have to deal with the judicial system and were it not
the ECHR, I'm sure we would have domestic judges that were trying to prevent us discharging our duty to the British people. We have to deal with that. I do, however, feel, and I've said this in speeches, the speech I made to the Chatham House think tank, a lot of the institutions, a lot of the agreements that were put in place in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War are in many instances now 70 plus years old, and we need to make sure that they remain relevant for the modern world. And I've said that about the United Nations, I've said that about the World Bank. So it is right that we look at making sure these things are right for the modern world. It is also right we break the model of these evil people smuggling gangs. Now, border control is rightly a job for the Home Office, but we work very closely with the Home Office to make sure the countries on the routes that the people traffickers use, we are trying to interdict and interrupt and break their business model at every single stage. That's the part of the equation the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office lead on, and we work very, very closely with them and will continue to do so. So I think we can break the model without necessarily needing to leave the ECHR. And the point that strike me is that we're actually doing really quite effective work on this. So, for example, Albanian small boat arrivals down 90%, 90%.
After the deal was struck.
After the deal that we came to with Albania.
So maybe Keir Starmer's right and you need to do a deal with Brussels then? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, what I'm saying is you need Conservatives doing the negotiation because negotiation isn't just turning up and asking for stuff, it's actually cutting deals. And the UK, as I say, is doing better than our European neighbours on this. So, as I say, Albanian small boat arrivals down 90%. Small boat arrivals this year down 20%. Compare that with arrivals in Italy, which are up 50%. Illegal migration across Europe up 30%. So the European numbers are trending in the wrong direction. The UK numbers are heading in the right direction because of the tough decisions that we are making across government.
Now, finally, we're going to throw out to questions in a moment, but the last thing I just wanted to ask you is, I believe you're the first non-white Foreign Secretary to hold that position, and there's been a lot of debate over the past week about has multiculturalism failed? What's your take on that?
Well, it's quite striking. One of the things about my job is I get to look back at the UK as other countries view us. And there are lots of countries around the world that have many, many decades or indeed centuries of migration, often far more than the UK has done. And yet we somehow are unique in the UK that the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, the Trade Secretary, and others, I shouldn't have started a list because you always forget people, which is embarrassing, but many of the top seats around the government table are occupied by people whose heritage is not from these islands. And the reason I think we have been uniquely successful is because of our attitude towards integration and making sure that the people who've come to this country, chosen to make their homes in this country through legitimate and legal means, are properly integrated, feel part of society, learn the language and mix, I think is one of our great strengths. One of the things that does worry me is sometimes this well-intentioned but erroneous trend towards compartmentalization, to like this kind of separation thing. And I think we should celebrate what brings us together. And you know, diversity matters. I'm a rugby player, and I say, you know, if everyone on the rugby pitch was the same size and shape, you wouldn't be a successful team. Diversity works, but not some tokenism diversity, genuine diversity of thought, of background, but also, like a rugby team, despite the diversity, you're fundamentally playing by the same set of rules and pulling in the same direction. That has been a really successful model to the UK, and I think it's something that is absolutely well worth protecting and championing. And I do fear this, as I say, potential trend towards compartmentalization, isolating ethnic groups within society, which I think would be a terrible, terrible error.
Well, that was a very quick and rapid romp through your year as Foreign Secretary. I'm sure many others have questions. Have we got some roving microphones here? I'm going to start as a couple of journalists in the room, and I know from my past life the journalists love to come to think tank events to ask politicians questions. So do we have any journalists who want to ask any questions? We've got Stephen down here and Luke beside him. We just take these two questions together, thank you. And Callum is busying his way down there. Thank you very much.
Castle from the New York Times. On Ukraine, I think you said earlier this year that it was vital that this didn't become a war of attrition because that was what Putin wanted. Would you accept that it now has become a war of attrition? And if so, what are the implications? And also, if I could ask you in terms of Western unity, I mean, you talked a little bit about the United States. How are you concerned, or perhaps even deeply concerned, about European unity, and in particular what happened in the elections in Slovakia?
Do we take two questions and I'll come back on both, or one each?
You've pretty much covered what I was going to ask. It's Luke McGee from CNN.
Yeah.
You said foreign policy doesn't take place on Twitter, but to extend on what Stephen just said, there's a fairly well-known former US president, possible future US president, who did a lot of his on Twitter. When you meet our allies, do you sense any nervousness about having someone so erratic back in the White House at an institutional level? Because, of course, Theresa May had to pretty much encourage Trump to go on the record and say he wouldn't defund NATO. So I just wondered if, when you speak to our allies, if you sense any of this nervousness.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So with regard to the situation in Ukraine, obviously the preferred option would have been a fast and decisive victory for the Ukrainians. The truth of the matter is the Russian military spent the winter ahead of the spring counteroffensive digging in trench systems, laying mines, putting up tank traps and physical barriers. They made it a highly non-permissive environment for maneuverist warfare, which has meant it has become a much more attritional conflict. That is not what any of us would have wanted, because attritional wars are slow and they are bloody. So it's not the preferred option. However, the Ukrainians are still winning. So even with those physical defences, even with the Russians digging in so hard over the winter, the Ukrainians are still gaining ground. We must never lose sight of that. We would prefer that they would win quickly, but the second best option is that they win slowly, and they are winning slowly. Now, it means that we have to be more patient. It means our resilience has to last longer. What it doesn't mean is that we should ditch them at this point, for all the reasons that I've explained. And with regard to a future President Trump, I mean, he was a president, I think, unlike any former US president, so never served in a political appointment, never served in the US military. So he was a very, very different style of US president. And when we first started working with him, I think the whole world was unused to dealing with him. But we've seen him work for 4 years. And so his unpredictability is a bit more predictable, if you know what I mean. So, as I said to Seb, you know, we will make our relationship with the elected head of the United States of America work. And whether that's a future President Trump or President Biden's second term or whatever permutation might come about, we will make that relationship work because it's in our global interest to make it work. And with regard to countries in Europe, this war has put huge strain on all of us. And actually, the closer you are to the conflict in terms of geography, the greater the strain, the number of Ukrainian refugees, the economic impact. And I get it's not easy, but we do have to stick with it. And this is a conversation I have in the States, in Europe. And I also make the point to leaders in the developing world when they say, look, this is not our problem, this is your problem, but we're feeling the pain. I make the point to them that actually it's all of our problems, because defending the UN Charter is really important for those smaller countries around the world who perhaps don't have the strength of arms to defend themselves against attack. Their best shield is a well-enforced UN Charter. And Russia has attempted to smash that, and we have a duty to prevent them doing so.
Thank you. We've got 5 minutes left. So it's Kitty at the back there, the gentleman beside her. Is there anyone else over there who's got a question while we're at it? We'll get the gentleman at the back there. So just Kitty Donaldson, first of all.
Thank you, Kitty Donaldson from Bloomberg News. I'm afraid, Foreign Secretary, I don't quite understand your answer on the ECHR. It seems to be one of the emerging themes of the conference. Could you just explain in words of one syllable whether you were for or against leaving?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foreign Secretary. I'm not only Conservative member and candidate, I'm also North Korean escapee. I escaped twice from North Korea. I was imprisoned 4 times, 3 times in China, and 1 time was in North Korea. And I was once repatriated by North Korea. And last week I spoke at the United Nations about repatriation issues by Chinese authorities. And when they sent back to North Korea, they end up in prison camps, and women sexually abused, and a lot of horrendous and all people executed. There are many in political prison as well. And I understand you also visited South Korea and went to Korean border, and I was carefully following your news. My question is particularly since I also personally experienced repatriation, where I experienced North Korean prison and 3 times in China, and also many people are still being repatriated by Chinese authorities over the past 20 years. Would you please have a dialogue with South Korean authorities and Chinese authorities, encourage China allow North Korean escapees to go to South Korea? North Korean escapees, we do not want to stay in China. We want to go to South Korea. Under One Korea policy, South Korea offers citizenship, and Britain take a global role. I would be very grateful if there is any comment, if you could contribute. Thank you.
Thank you. And then just finally, gentleman here, please.
Yes, I work for the Iraq-Britain Business Council, and we had a meeting earlier this week with an ambassador from the Gulf, and they were quite clear that there seems to be a strong perception that America and particularly the British are withdrawing from the Gulf, and of course that's creating a vacuum with Russia and China moving in. Maybe you'd like to comment.
Thank you. And I'm going to begin, James. I'm going to put my former journalist hat on and be very clear. They wanted a 1-word answer on the ECHR.
Of course, which you're not going to get. So the point I'm making is I don't feel that in order to achieve what we need to achieve to protect our borders, we are necessitated to leave the ECHR. The point is that we have demonstrated success, and I have no doubt that the decisions that we have made are completely within the boundaries of international law. So you're saying it's an emerging question, only because journalists keep raising it with me, because actually it's not something that any member has raised with me as yet. So that's my position. As I say, reform is important, but I do think that our position is entirely in accordance with international law. With regard to the repatriation point, it's an incredibly important point. Can I just congratulate you for your resilience on this? Funnily enough, I had Park Jin. I had lunch with him at the middle of this week, and we're going to be increasingly doing a lot more work with Korea, and DPRK, of course, is a topic that comes up very, very regularly. I will give you this assurance that this is something that we will discuss with the Korean authorities. I can't make a promise further than that, but you've raised a really, really important point, and I will bring it up. And with regard to the situation in the Gulf, I think, look, when I became a minister there, it was raised with me. I think there were a number of things that conspired to bring that viewpoint into the minds of many people in the region. I think the fact that when we had a hung parliament, we didn't travel as much as we should have done. We were then delayed with COVID, and because we spent so much time talking about Brexit-related issues, the narrative coming out of the UK was very EU focused. All we can do is repair that by visibility, by visiting them, encouraging them to visit us. It's an incredibly important part of the reason, both for prosperity and security reasons. But we've got to prove it by doing it, saying it. As I said to Seb, saying it ain't enough. You got to do it. It's about results. And I intend to kind of change that perception through our actions.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask one last very quick bonus question before we wrap up. There was a former Foreign Secretary, a man who you worked with at City Hall, who was your predecessor, who went from the Foreign Office onto other things later in life. Could you ever foresee that for yourself?
Is that Viagra?
I think that's a mint, James.
Oh, right, okay.
That was a very good distraction technique from that question there.
Not my first rodeo. So look, I love the job that I've got. And I know this is such a boring answer. It is an unbelievable privilege to serve in this role. It is one of the great offices of state. It is one of the best jobs in global politics. And you know, if I had the stamina and a magic wand, I'd be quite happy to have this as being, you know, the role that I stayed in until I turn up my toes. Now, I am quite sure there will be a whole load of competitive, talented people aspiring to be the UK Foreign Secretary. But as long as I've got a say in the matter, I'm going to keep delivering in my role. I've got a fantastic ministerial, very experienced and fantastic ministerial team. The world is a fascinating place. There's serious work to be done, and I mean the simple truth of the matter. And having had the chance to work with the Prime Minister, and I confess I wasn't from his kind of, you know, political tribe previously. I'd never worked with him, never worked with the Treasury. I knew him personally. Always gotten very, very well with him. He's always been good as gold in his relationships with me, but I never worked with him directly. When you do see him working up close and personal, the work rate that he has, the amount of intellectual effort that he applies to every decision that he makes, his willingness to make the difficult decisions and then stick to his guns having made them is genuinely admirable. So I want to see him take us into the next election, win the next election, and lead us in our unprecedented, was it fifth Parliament, and I would love to be Foreign Secretary throughout that. That's my plan.
And that means you're saying we, the Conservatives, will win the next election?
That's my plan.
Right, well, I think that's a very good, clear answer on that one. Now, James, clearly you talked about your passion for being Foreign Secretary. Everyone who's heard you here can hear that, and the amazing travels and work that you've done, doing that very important work with Ukraine, with taking the pragmatic view on China, working closely with America, and making sure we're in the right place with Brussels. But thank you so much for giving us your time this evening. Thank you all for your questions and coming, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And please come to the rest of Onwards. Fantastic, jam-bursting programme that we have over the next couple of days. But for now, could you please all put your hands together and please thank the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly.